Good morning, everyone. We're about to make a start. I would like to welcome everyone to the Energy Unit's panel discussion as a part of our celebration for Energy Month. I would first like to start by welcoming the Honorable Samuel Joseph, the Minister of Communication, Works, Energy and the Environment. I would also like to welcome Permanent Secretary Beverly Menz, Minister of Agriculture, Housing, Land and Environment. Right now I'm about to ask you to stand as we will have the opening prayers by Mr. Felix Prasad.
Let us pray. Father and God, we give you thanks and we give you praise. We thank you for life, health, and strength, for your many blessings that make it rich and adds no sorrow. This morning, God, as we come here on this day, Father, we pray, O God, that as we open our panel discussion for Energy Month, Lord, that your presence will be with us as we continue, Father, to build resilience in energy, empowering people for a sustainable future. Father and God, we pray, O God, that you will indeed have your way, Father, and that heaven's plan and program will be accomplished in even what we do. Lord, we pray that you bless each and every person that is here. We pray, O God, that everything that is going to be done will be done decently and in honor for your glory's sake. In Jesus' name, and all God's people say, amen.
You may now be seated. At this time, I would like to welcome Ms. Nadia Brown for our territorial song. O Montserrat, dear motherland, your children raise your standard high in toil and tears to serve you well. The emerald jewel from God's hand. O Montserrat, by nature blessed, to you children sing. Come well, oh woe, come friend or foe, to you your people cling.
We'll now like to invite Dr. Samuel Joseph, Honorable Minister, to come and have some opening remarks.
Good day, all. It's my first time in this capacity, so you all are special. So good day to all. Energy Month. There's a logo, not a logo, there's a phrase that's connected to MCWL, Green, Connected, and Thriving. And there's another quote that I like to use, and I think it's important for us to understand it. If the world outside is changing faster than we are changing inside, we are in problems. So the world is changing drastically. The world that we were born in is not the world that we are currently in. And in 5 years, the world is going to be completely changed again. People are having more and more children. The population of the earth is going up. People are using more and more tablets, phones, electric vehicles. Everything is now consuming more energy. And unless we start thinking as a world, I'm going to do the world first. Unless we start thinking of a world, how are we going to address the problem of people's consumption of energy and the resources of the earth is increasing? But what's happening is that there's pressure put on our ecosystem, there's pressure put on our resources, there's pressure put on people's finances. How do you sustain people using more energy? One of the problems we've always had is that because we think that we are monsters, somehow we have disconnected ourselves from the rest of the world, but we're still part of the world, and these things are still impacting us. We still have our phones, we still have our fridges, we have, instead of having one TV now, we have one in our bedroom, one in our living room, or in our kitchen, and some of us in our bathroom. So this is happening. We have now reached a stage where Monster has its first electric vehicle that's going to increase. So the demand upon our energy usage is going up. And we have to start thinking as a country and etc. How do we move forward? How do we reduce our use of energy? What do we do to reduce our electric bill to LED lights, to energy efficient appliances? What can the government do to assist people in going down that road? How do we deal with the fact of climate change? And although we might say we're only 4,500 people and our impact upon climate change is not much. But it's the same situation if you're walking down the road and one person throws something on the ground and say, well, it's only one bottle. But if 50 people do it now, you have a whole garbage problem. So each of us individually are contributing to the problem, and each of us individually have to start thinking, what can we do as individuals to help our country, help our world, and to help the future generation that's coming. And then from the government side, I know we are committed to make Montserrat green. The green part of the title is something I'm directly committed to implement it. We need to get green in, I won't give the date, but I just discussed that with the energy directors. But I believe it can be done in 5 to 10 years, that we can drastically reduce our fuel consumption from fossil fuel, and that's one of my priorities going forward. So with that, those are my few remarks. I hope that the panel discussion is fruitful, that everybody participates and understands that we are part of a global community and we don't exist on our own. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. We'll now like to introduce the members of the panel.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We just have a slight change in the program. Initially, we were going to start the panel discussion, but we have a few students who's among us who would have competed in various competitions, and we want to give them the opportunity to get their awards, and then they'll be leaving just after. So at this point, we're actually going to go through the process of naming the winners for the different competitions that we have and pass out the awards based on that. We have just a quick video of. So for Energy Month, we had 3 competitions. One was a poster competition where we had students between the age of 5 to 15 were asked to basically create a poster that depicts this year's theme. The theme for CARICOM Energy Month 2019 is empowering people, building resilience. And what we asked students to do is to create a poster that depicts this. We had in total 28 or so submissions, and it was quite difficult in selecting from those posters a winner. Shortly, we're going to show the top 3 posters from those submitted. Also, we had a video competition where we asked the general public to submit a video that is roughly 2 minutes long, again, surrounding the theme for 2019. And we've had just 1 submission, unfortunately, but that 1 submission, I think, was well done. Again, we will make an attempt to actually highlight this particular submission in today's discussion. Additionally, there was an essay competition where we asked person to, again, write an essay roughly between 1,200 to 2,000 words around the general theme, and we had, again, 1 submission for that. Unfortunately, I think it was supposed to be done as an assignment for the secondary school, but for some mix-up, it didn't happen. So we want to take the time to just at least highlight these students in terms of their achievements and what they would have been able to do. So just give me 1 second. Let me just get this up and running. All right, so first, we're going to look at the poster competition. So as I said, we had about 20-something submission for the poster competition. And coming in third place is Leanna Green, a grade 6 student from the Braids Primary School. And this is a poster, and she provided us with a brief description of what the poster is depicting. So my poster shows where Montserrat is now, where fuel has to be imported, and it is expensive, and our electricity bills are high. It also shows where I hope we will be in the future using renewable energy sources. Using renewable energy sources needed to fuel and using renewable energy sources, so our need for fuel and importing is less. In the future, we can have cleaner energy sources like wind, solar, and hydro. All right, so this was Leanna's submission. All right. Unfortunately, Leanna is not here today. That particular school is having examination today. So we'll pass a prize out at a later date. So, in second position is Alana Cassie, a grade 6 student at St. Augustine. In her depiction, she basically have a tree at the center, and you have Montserrat with a light switch there. She depicts the geothermal plant, wind, solar, and they're looking at the environment as a whole. And then there's a theme that is included here. All right, so this is our second place winner, Alana Cassie, from grade 6, St. Augustine. Our first place winner went to Jasmine Guilford, a grade 6 student of St. Augustine. Now, I want to depict a few things in relation to this particular poster because there's a lot packed into this small, neat drawing. What is showing here, and I think it was quite interesting, so go green, renewable energy saves our planet. And as adults, we need to ensure that we do as much as we can to pass on this wonderful planet to our children and grandchildren. So we have to do our part. And this is Jasmine's way of telling us we need to do what we need to do now to save their Earth going forward. And what she shows is that there are different sources of energy that we can use to do so. So she's highlighting the hydro energy that can be used. She also is indicating there is solar PV that we get from the sun, the geothermal that can be used, and the wind turbine also can be used to provide in that. But what I found what was pretty interesting about this particular submission is that if you notice there's a corn here, and she's showing that you can actually get biofuel from corn to provide fuel that we may need for our transportation sector. Now, our transportation sector is a critical part. So for these particular submissions, we have rubric that we were using to judge the students on. And one of the things that was important here was the effort. And it felt as though the effort here was significant compared to the other student because of the level of thinking that went into designing this particular submission. So this is the winner of the poster competition. In the essay competition, our winner is Alia Gittins, and Alia Gittins is here with us today. And we have asked her to quickly read her submission to the audience. So I'm going to call Alia to just give us a quick read of her submission.
My essay is entitled, Empowering People, Building Resilience. Empowering people, especially youth, can improve the resilience of Montserrat. When speaking of empowering someone, according to Cambridge Dictionary, it means to encourage and support one in achieving something. Furthermore, Resilience speaks of the ability of someone or something to readily recover from hardship. Empowerment can be achieved through education, energy initiatives, and training. Thus, by using these methods to empower persons, Montserrat's resilience can be further enhanced. The following essay seeks to explore how the people of Montserrat can be empowered to implement sustainable energy practices and how that empowerment leads to a more resilient Montserrat. The energy sector comprises of industries which concentrate on energy exploration, extraction, refining, and distribution. Currently, the energy sector on Montserrat is largely dependent on fossil fuels. The energy derived from fossil fuels, which are imported by Delta Petroleum Limited, are sourced from liquid petroleum gas, diesel, and gasoline. This is then used by Montserrat Utilities Limited, who is the sole generator, transmitter, distributor, and concessionaire of electricity. Recently, phase 1 of a 1 megawatt solar photovoltaic and battery storage energy project has been completed. The energy generated from this plant contributes to 3.5% of the total electrical energy that is produced. Also, 3 geothermal plants have been established, but these have been unsuccessful in generating power. Undoubtedly, the best means of empowering the people of Montserrat is by educating them. The provision of information helps people to make better decisions. Also, being educated gives one more control over his or her life when the knowledge gained is put to proper use. In other words, as Sir Francis Bacon says, knowledge is power. Therefore, if persons on Montserrat are adequately and appropriately informed about sustainable energy practices, they can be motivated to implement them. Notably, the energy units within the Ministry of Communication, Energy, Works and Labor has continuously strived to inform residents, especially youths, about sustainable energy through various platforms. For example, in 2018, an energy tour was conducted where students from the primary schools, the Montserrat Secondary School, and the Montserrat Community College benefited. They were given the opportunity to visit the geothermal sites, the Montserrat Utilities Limited Power Station, Delta Petroleum, and the Montserrat National Trust, where a solar panel is mounted. Thereafter, several of the attendees shared their experience on Radio Montserrat during Miss Rose Willock's program, The Cultural Show. Additionally, the Energy Unit has hosted several forums to enlighten persons on how they can reduce their energy consumption. Likewise, many other forums were held to increase the people of Montserrat's awareness of the country's movement towards being a 100% renewable energy-based country, and 2, how they can participate in making this goal a success. CARICOM Energy Month in November is used as an opportune time period to educate persons on sustainable energy and empower them to implement sustainable energy practices. During this time, catchy jingles are played on Radio Montserrat to promote the month. 2, various competitions, which mostly cater to youth, are held to get persons to participate in making the energy sector more sustainable, while at the same time educating. These are some of the educational means by which the people of Montserrat, especially youths, have been empowered. Additionally, several energy initiatives have been embarked upon in Montserrat, which have empowered persons to practice energy efficiency. During the period of November to December 2018, the government of Montserrat waived the custom duties and consumption tax for Christmas decorations. This marvelous initiative, termed the Christmas Decorations Exemption Program, was introduced to encourage the people of Montserrat to use energy-efficient decorations, such as LED electrical Christmas lights, low-energy laser decorative spotlights, and solar-powered Christmas lights. Furthermore, in August 2019, the first electric vehicle was publicly introduced on Montserrat. The Director of Energy, Mr. Kenrick Burke, mentioned in a recent interview that the purpose of introducing the electric vehicle is to highlight the advantages of using such on Montserrat. Also, as stated in the Montserrat National Energy Policy 2016 to 2030, this will assist Montserrat in developing a robust and integrated transportation sector and promote the development of electric, hybrid electric, and advanced vehicle technologies. The electric vehicle will be used as part of a pilot project to assess its cost effectiveness in comparison to a normal internal combustion engine vehicle. If the results of this project satisfy the energy policy's objectives, it can encourage persons to invest in an electric vehicle. To top things off, the government of Montserrat advanced this initiative by implementing a waiver on the custom duties and the consumption tax on all 100% electric vehicles imported until 2024. This grand step will empower persons to participate in molding the island into one that has a sustainable energy future. Furthermore, training persons can empower them to practice sustainable energy. Training persons who are unskilled in the energy sector can develop their skills and expertise. Thereafter, they will be empowered to develop renewable energy systems. Several trainings geared towards renewable energy has been conducted. For example, the Labor Department under the Ministry of Communication, Works, Energy and Labor held a 2-day solar PV technology training. It involved the participation of students from the Montserrat Secondary School and Montserrat Community College. Yes, again, the Labor Department held a training in solar production in collaboration with the energy units. This training catered to electrical wiring contractors and other technicians. It is training programs like these that can empower the people of Montserrat to install renewable energy technologies in their homes and businesses. Provided that persons on Montserrat are empowered to implement sustainable energy practices, Montserrat's resilience can be improved. In the energy context, resilience can have a twofold outlook: technological and environmental. As it relates to these, energy infrastructure and energy security must be alluded to. Energy infrastructure refers to utilities or technologies used to transport energy from the producer to the consumer and to manage and direct its flow. Such technologies include natural gas pipelines and electric transmission lines. Meanwhile, short-term energy security focuses on the ability of the energy system to be resilient within the supply-demand balance. Unfortunately, natural disasters are an ever-present threat to the island's energy infrastructure and energy security as a result of our location within the hurricane belts. Moreover, climate change only rubs salt in the wound. The International Energy Agency states that greater resilience to climate change impacts is necessary in order for the energy sector to be technically viable. Climate change is as a result of man-made global warming. According to Kennedy and Lindsay, global warming refers only to the Earth's rising surface temperature, while climate change includes warming and the side effects of warming, like melting glaciers, heavier rainstorms, or more frequent droughts. Already, the reality of climate change and its effects have been reaffirmed with the passage of Hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017 across the Caribbean and Dorian in 2019 across the Bahamas. In fact, the impacts of Irma and Maria in Montserrat were especially seen in the damage done to the electric transmission lines as well as other structures. Consequently, it is evident that there is a need for greater resilience. Nonetheless, in less than 2 weeks, these damages were repaired. In fact, This feat can be credited to the training the Montserrat Utilities Limited team received in preparing for a hurricane. Also, residents would have played a significant part in minimizing the extent of the damage as a result of their knowledge, not to mention the extent to which education and energy initiatives provide empowerment reduces the people of Montserrat's contribution to climate change, the menace of Montserrat's sustainable energy future. In conclusion, empowering the people of Montserrat, especially youths, to actively participate in the movement towards a sustainable energy future is imperative. Through the means of education, energy initiatives, and the training, this can be achieved. Significantly, the government of Montserrat has used the previously mentioned measures to promote sustainable energy practices. The knowledge and skills gained from outreach programs and trainings which focus on sustainable energy can be implemented to build resilience, both technological and environmental. Thank you.
So I just want to present Ms. Gittins with her prize. And the next competition was a video competition, which was won by Lorian Brand. And we just have a short clip of that particular video.
On Montserrat. Come, the man! The resource can be used over and over and over again. Behind me are solar panels. They get their energy from the sun. Using solar energy reduces fuel surcharge. This means your electricity bill goes lower. First, your thermal well was dug in 2013 in Corking. Geothermal energy is when we use heat from the earth to generate energy. Here are some tips to conserve energy. Don't stack up food in the microwave. Spread them out so that heat can pass. Don't overfill your kettle. Only put in as much as you need. Don't leave your refrigerator door open. Turn off lights when leaving a room. Light bulb.
So that was the winning submission for the video competition. I will now call on Lonnie Howe to introduce the winners of the ICT competition.
Good morning, everyone. I would assume protocol was established. I just got here. Apologies. I want to thank Mr. Berg for allowing me to give the prizes for this week's ICT Week-based competitions. This week was a very exciting, interacting few sessions, I should say. We started the week off with some radio quizzes, which actually happened all week. Then we also did a leveraging social media workshop, which is not finished. It will be concluded today. We also had a very exciting tech hunt competition at the Montserrat Secondary School, which was really exciting. We have some of the winners here today, and they could probably tell you all about the competition as well. So I'd like to first start off with the winners from the radio competition, the radio quiz. On day one, the winner, Mr. Everson Kernan. Everson was asked the question, what is the national vision for ICT on Montserrat? And he correctly answered, Montserrat in a digital world, green, connected, and thriving. So I'd like to ask Mr. Kernan or representative to come and accept the prize. Day two, the question was asked, what kind of software would you use to protect your PC from viruses and unwanted intrusion? And Ms. Shanisha Weeks correctly gave the answer, antivirus software. Shanice? On day three, the question, name 3 social media platforms where we communicate and connect with other people. And Mr. Diego Benjamin correctly answered, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Other options would have been LinkedIn, Snapchat, TikTok, which is a new one on the block, YouTube, and Pinterest. Mr. Diego Benjamin. No, they fire. Yes. And then the other 2 smartwatches. Thank you. Yesterday's question, name 5 ICT tools that we use frequently. 5 ICT tools that we use frequently. Can anybody else give me some answers to that, other than the winner, of course? 5 ICT tools that we use frequently. Adults. Let me see if you know this one. 5 ICT tools that we use daily. Adults. Phones, yes. Tablets, yes. Watch, yes. Good. So Miss Naisha Jagannath answered that question correctly. Naisha? No, smartwatch. So the options were phone, TV, internet, tablets, or personal computers, laptops, radios, etc. And today, this morning, the question was asked, what ICT tool has replaced the traditional blackboards used in schools? And Mr. Jason Smith correctly answered, interactive whiteboards. Watch. Okay, so we're on to the other competition now. This competition was held in the Montserrat Secondary School, and it was called Tech Hunt. Now, this is sort of a new sort of approach that we did this year to, get them excited about ICT and the knowledge that they would have gained throughout the ICT classes and so on. So we have a few winners. The competition happened every day this week. We concluded yesterday, and every day they would have won prizes. The way the competition actually worked was that we developed some QR codes I'm not sure if many of you will be familiar with that, but the QR codes are essentially, you could develop it on the computer where you enter a word or a question or some sorts, and it actually converts it to a code, right? And so we converted those, stuck them, printed the codes out, and stuck them up at various points throughout the compound. And the students were asked to use their smartphones, their tablets, and essentially go around scanning the codes. Once they scanned the code on their phone, the question would pop up on their phone, and then they're able to see the question. There were other codes as well where they were able to scan another code, which gave them directions as to where to go next. So all the codes were all over the school, so they had to run from one end to the next and just moving around. And so yeah, it was really exciting, interacting. The students really got into it. So I'm really happy about that. So the daily winners, Mr. Denmarky McDonald, he would have won it on day one. I'm not sure if he's here. Is he here? I'm not seeing him. No, okay, can you accept the prize on his behalf, please? Perhaps? He will be getting one of the bags. Some ICT gadgets. Yes, a green bag. Day two, Delovison DeBruce. I don't see him as well. No. Okay, so he would have won on day two. That's Delovison DeBruce. Day three, the winner, Ruby Ray. And the big final happened yesterday, and that was won by, well, second place, Ruby. You can come back and accept your prize. Ruby came in second. And the winner, Josiah Hackett. Josiah would have won a laptop, and Ruby won a Samsung Galaxy tablet. Thank you, Mr. Kenrick, for allowing me to present the ICT prizes for ICT Week.
At this time, I'm just going to ask everyone to place their hands under their chair to see if you are a lucky winner of a giveaway. At the front, you know. Let's see. Come on, come on, come on. Or you can check out the chair next to you, if it's empty. And it looks like I have two persons. Two? Another one? If you got a number, you can come to the front to receive your giveaway. And that was it for our short giveaway. Many more to come. I am now going to introduce today's panel. First, we have Mr. Owen Lewis. Owen Lewis is an independent energy projects development, oversight, and implementation consultant with the Rocky Mountain Institute Carbon War Room. Owen is a member of the Montserrat Utilities Limited Board of Directors and is currently the project manager for the Government of Montserrat 1 megawatt solar PV plus battery storage and Montserrat public lighting improvement projects. Please welcome Mr. Owen Lewis. Next, we have Mr. Graham Ryan. Graham Ryan has a 20-year background in the geothermal, geophysics, and volcanology. He has conducted and led several geothermal exploration projects all over the globe. In New Zealand, the Western United States, the Caribbean, South America, and East Africa. He specializes in using electromagnet techniques, particularly magneto, to image and interpret geothermal systems. He has also experience in the active volcano monitoring at the Montserrat Volcano Observatory and in laboratory modeling of volcanic processes. Please welcome Mr. Graham Ryan. Our next panelist is Ashneil Jeffers. Ashneil Jeffers is a digital entrepreneur and active environmentalist. He currently works at the Department of Environment as an intern environmental technician. Ashneil is the opposition leader in the Montserrat Youth Parliament and one of Peace Boat's Ocean and Climate Youth Ambassadors. He has worked alongside multiple NGOs such as Waite Institute, Coral Click Conservation, and Aqua Montserrat, traveling to over 7 countries across 3 continents to represent Montserrat on environmental, social, and other matters. He also wishes to help his country and its people grow. Please welcome Mr. Ashneil Jeffers. Our next panelist is Mr. Kennard Ryan. Kennard Ryan is currently the Renewable Energy and Special Projects Advisor with the Montserrat Utilities Limited. He has obtained a Bachelor of Science degree in Renewable Energy from the University of Dundee in 2014 and most recently completed the United Nations Geothermal 6-month training program in Iceland. He is now a certified in geothermal utilization and having worked with the Montserrat Utilities Limited Water Division for a total of 28 years, Mr. Ryan is keen to see the advancement of renewable energies and the deliveries of this service to the people of Montserrat. Please welcome Mr. Kennard Ryan. And our last panelist is Mr. Peter White, and I will allow him to come up and give a brief of himself. And joining them on the panel will be the Director of Energy, Mr. Kenrick Burke.
Well, I'm not so sure what I'm supposed to say. I didn't give it a heads up on this one. But I guess the most important thing as far as this is concerned is that I'm an electrical engineer background. I worked with government of Montserrat when our electricity services were still part of public works or communication works. I later went on to work for what used to be Monlec for a number of years. After that, I moved to the Montserrat Secondary School as as teacher initially, and later as principal of Montserrat Secondary School for a number of years. Following that, well, along with that, during that whole period, I was practicing technician, you could say, in terms of electricals, installing whatever in homes, etc. So I have a background in terms of home use and installations. I was, as part of the government system, I was also an electrical inspector at one point. Then I became an itinerant whatever. I was here, there, and everywhere. During the volcanic crisis, I was away in the US where I worked as a consultant for the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority. Consultant, computer consultant, because apart from my basic electrical training, etc., I developed or tried to develop some expertise in computer science. In fact, I introduced computers to the Montserrat Secondary School while I was there. But last but not least is the fact that I returned to Montserrat as the managing director of the newly formed Montserrat Utilities Limited. And whatever that brings to the table, that's what I have.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mr. White, for your introduction. So we have two segments with today's panel discussion. What we're going to have first is we have 7 guided questions that would have been sent to the panelists to provide some feedback on their end. We also have an open session where we can ask persons from the audience to actually provide questions to the panelists and so that they can actually respond. Today's question focus mainly on the current status of the energy sector, and it really looks at what are some of the different things that can be done, policies and implementation that can be done to make the transition that is required for the island. So the first question that I'm going to pose to the panelists, and we'll start the response from my left and down to the right. So currently, roughly 98.5% of the island's energy consumption is actually met by imported fossil fuel. And of that, that equates to roughly 25% of the island's GDP expended on the importation of fossil fuel. 47% of that is attributed to the transportation sector. So for your cars, your vehicle, for the sea transport as well. So a large portion of this is attributed to transportation. So my first question to the panelists is, what strategies can be implemented to achieve a significant reduction in the level of consumption in the transportation sector? So I'll start with Mr. Graham Ryan, just to give us your input in terms of what strategies you think can be implemented to have a significant reduction in the level of consumption in the transportation sector.
Okay, well, I think 2 ideas come to mind. One, if we had a good low-cost renewable energy source, electric vehicles would be a lot more viable on Montserrat. We have very short distances mainly, and so if we had low-cost renewable energy, it would be low cost to recharge them, and that would reduce the amount of fossil fuel energy that's used. And also another thing that would be useful would be to have better public transport, again fueled by electric vehicles that could be recharged using recharged using renewable energy, if we had a more reliable public transport system, more people would be likely to use it, and again, that would increase efficiencies. So those are two very basic ideas.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Ryan, for your input. Mr. Lewis?
Good morning, everyone. In addition to the two that Graham have spoken of, the next obvious ones are the size of the engine of the vehicle that you have. The larger and more powerful the engine, the more fuel it uses. So if you have a 3-liter engine vehicle, you will use more fuel than someone that has a 2-liter engine. So in selecting our vehicles, we need to look at the actual size of the vehicles that determines its fuel efficiency. Other ideas in terms of doing that, it's how we drive. So if we are driving and we are speeding all the time or revving on the engine all the time, that increases the amount of fuel that one consumes. So I would like for us to concentrate on the personal things that we can do in terms of our selection of our vehicles and how we drive. That in turn is going to save money for us as individuals, as families, as businesses.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Jeffers?
Thank you. So I just want to echo the words that my previous colleagues have said, and just also really just that we need to go and do more for electric vehicles. So right now we have one electric vehicle and one charging station, which isn't enough to actually incentivize anybody to get electric vehicles. We have concessions, but electric vehicles, I think, are generally more expensive. I'm not sure, but they're generally more expensive than just a gas vehicle, especially because you could just buy one used for a lot cheaper. So if we really want to go and get electric vehicles and that kind of technology in Montserrat properly, then we'll have to go and make it like we have to go and really do a lot more to go and really get people to be incentivized to actually go and go green. The thing is that a lot of companies and businesses, they won't really do that in Montserrat because it's a bit of a risk. So we will need assistance from the government to be able to kind of do some testing with the electric vehicle that they're doing right now, but do more to be able to really get people to be incentivized. Things maybe like loan programs or something like that that have a low interest rate. Having maybe a company or like a program to be able to switch your old gas car for an electric vehicle, get some sort of discount for a better car that will be able to work a lot better, have more charging stations, even having bundles and so on, so that when you buy an electric car, you get some solar panels or something like that to install in your house so that it makes it a lot more efficient. We have to make it extremely enticing, because right now, a gas car, even if I wanted to buy an electric car personally, I can't justify it, because if I break down my car, imagine I want to get the new Tesla pickup truck. Right? Who knows? I might get it actually. And then I want to bring it to Montserrat. I can't justify me bringing it to Montserrat because as soon as I do anything and it breaks down, it's a dead truck. Unless I have the kind of money to import somebody just to go and fix it. So we really need to go and take this a lot more seriously and put in the proper implementation things in place, and just, we have to take a loss for a while, but then we're gonna have to just do it and push through it so that we can actually make this something,
All right, thanks a lot, Mr. Jeffers, for your meaningful contribution. Mr. Lewis, you want to make a contribution, additional?
So it is important, especially since we are having a discussion, and I'm glad that the young man brought up the points, because one of the things that we need to do is probably communicate more. Montserrat is actually in a position that we are probably the best place in the world, and I do not say that lightly. Earlier this year, government of Montserrat invested in training several technicians, close to 50 people, for maintaining and repairing electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid vehicles, which means for one vehicle that we have on island, the amount of people that are trained, and I mean certified trained, which means that these technicians can go any place in the world and show this certificate and be able to work. We brought in some certified trainers from the UK that came to Montserrat for 3 weeks and actually trained 3 different sets of people. The first week covered the diagnostic element of it. The second week actually trained our auto technicians, both those that work for Government of Montserrat and Montserrat Port Authority, MUL, and the private sector, to level 3. Currently, level 3 is the highest level of auto repair technician training that you can do. And we have currently in Montserrat 20 auto technicians that are trained to that and certified to that level. In addition, we've trained 20 members of the Royal Montserrat Police Force and the fire department to how to deal with the hazards of dealing with electric vehicles if there was an accident and they were the first responders on. So from a training point of view, I can tell you that we are probably better placed to deal with that than just about any other place in Montserrat.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Lewis, for that clarification. Mr. Kenneth Ryan?
Yeah, well, that is very good to hear that you have a lot of people trained to deal with electric vehicles. But my thing is, I think we should maybe go into biodiesel or ethanol. So we have different aspect of dealing with the fossil fuel problem.
All right, thanks a lot, Mr. Ryan. Mr. White?
Well, it seems a lot of the things that one would say have already been said in terms of perhaps immediate goal. The thought about going to biodiesel is one. The only difficulty there is that, as usual, because of our small size, because of our numbers, it's usually difficult to transition from the situation we're in, where everybody has a fossil fuel vehicle, to convince them that they should go to an electric vehicle because of the cost involved, etc., etc. And there must be a transition period. Now, one of the things that you can use in that terms of the transition from the fossil fuels to the would be what Mr. Ryan just mentioned, the biodiesel. And that now brings the issue of what does one use to produce the biodiesel. And that means we need to do some more with our agriculture. Now, that brings up another issue in terms of our land use, etc., etc. There's also another possibility, and that is the production of what is called synthetic gas. That now is another issue which also brings up issues with respect to numbers. But we're pushing for geothermal, we're pushing for solar, we're pushing for wind energy. And all of these, hopefully, will bring us to the point where we have not only sufficient energy for our local consumption with respect to electricity, not necessarily mentioning the transportation sector yet, but it means we may have excess energy than we normally consume. If we have excess energy, we can then go into possibly the production of what, as I said, is called syngas, synthetic, which could then be something we will be able to export. We also would look into the possibilities of generating hydrogen, where hydrogen is a fuel which it is possible to use in a converted fossil fuel burning vehicle. That would take some engineering on the part. I don't know if the training involved in electrical vehicles had any connections there. But what can be done is that we can produce hydrogen as a product, as a fuel carrier, which could also be used in combustion engines. if we convert them to that case. The hydrogen then could also be used as an exportable product. When you produce hydrogen, depending on the way you do it, and the way we would do it is by electrolysis. We will then also produce oxygen. Oxygen is also a product which can be exported. Neighboring islands, for instance, maybe have use for that. They use it in hospitals, etc., etc. It's something we can look into that is not necessarily dealing with the transportation sector, but it complements the transportation sector and makes it more, I would say, viable.
Right. Thanks a lot for your contribution, Mr. White. So in summary, we have actually looked at several opportunities here in the transportation sector for reducing. So we speak of the conversion to electric cars. We spoke about the whole idea of biodiesel. But I'd like to throw another idea into the mix as well, too. Because what I recognized when I came here, I went to a football match, and walking up the way to the stadium, I mean, there was 600 or so cars there. So I assume, going for the first time, that I'm going to see a crowd of over 2,000 or 3,000 persons. Get to the ground, and there was about 640 persons. So typically, persons, transport themselves with just one person in a vehicle. So I think where we can actually start and now is probably looking at being a bit more efficient in terms of our use of our personal transport. What do you think, would the idea of having a rideshare app be something that is applicable on the item? Would that make a difference? Would a person be interested in partaking in such? Is that something that is only possible in the larger islands? Anybody who want to jump in can actually jump into that question. Or whether or not the improving the efficiency of the public transportation, would that have an impact on persons' desire to use such a mode of transportation? Anyone can jump in terms of those two aspects.
I don't have anything profound to say, but I mean, I think it could be something that could work. I mean, it's a very low overhead system, and it leverages things that people already have. Some people already have cars, and people already need to go places. So it puts those two things together. So I think it could work, and it would be very easy to try it, I think. So it sounds like a good idea.
All right, sure. Sorry.
But yeah, it's basically the same thing. Yeah, honestly, I think it's just worth a try, and if it fails, it fails, but it's worth just trying at the very least and seeing how people react to it.
Thanks a lot for your contribution. Additionally, we would have shared some forms to the general audience in relation to a survey that we are actually undertaking as part of the pilot project that we're doing for the EV vehicle. What we're trying to do is to get information from the public as it relates to some of these things. It would have asked about ride sharing as well. So it can actually inform us in terms of our policies going forward. As highlighted earlier, the importance of actually having information, because that's what you're looking for in terms of information from an electric vehicle to kind of inform persons whether or not it's worthwhile investing in one. So we are embarking on a pilot project that we hope soon that we can share that information with the public to give them a better idea of the importance or the value of purchasing an electric car. Now, those ideas that we spoke about is geared towards reducing the fuel consumption on the transportation sector. I think all of us here are of the view that...
Just one thing I wanted to mention. Just one thing I wanted to mention with respect to the public transportation thing, which I didn't get to, and that is the fact that it spoke about the cost of an electric vehicle. It is a lot less expensive to transition public transport to electric than individual vehicles. And as a result, that is one way of reducing. And if you're promoting public transportation, that should be the way to go, because it's definitely cheaper
Right.
than going
That-
individual.
That's correct. So if you're doing mass transport, it's always a lot more efficient in doing so. So what I wanted to segue into is the fact that, I mean, the aim of what we have just discussed is finding ways of reducing the consumption of fossil fuel for the transportation sector. And we all, I think, can agree that the use of indigenous resource on the island, there are a significant amount of it here, and we need to do as much as we can to maximize the use of indigenous resource so that we can minimize the importation of fossil fuel. So it is important for small island states to maximize the use of indigenous energy resources as a way of reducing their vulnerability to volatile changes in fuel prices. With the implementation of a feed-in tariff that allows MUL's customers to implement distributed generation systems such as solar PV systems, be a viable way of increasing the indigenous energy resource on the island? And what impact would the institution of such an arrangement have on the revenue, the costs of the remaining ratepayers, and the long-term operation of the utility? So the question is twofold. The first is whether or not a feed-in tariff will help with our transition to indigenous resource. And the second part of the question is what impact will that have on the revenue of MUL, on the remaining ratepayers, and also on the long-term operation of the utility? So it's a two-part question. This time I can start on my right, if you like, Mr. White, to take a stab at this question.
Well, that is an issue which I had a great deal of thought while I was at the helm of Montreal Utilities Limited. One of the difficulties we have with that is allowing feed-in tariff is fine. I believe it should be done. I think it's something which is worthwhile in the long run because it helps in reducing our dependence on fossil fuels. The only problem we have with that is the fact that it means that those who are better, I should say, more well off financially, would be the ones who would be able to implement such systems because they can afford the upfront cost of putting in a solar PV or perhaps even wind turbine. Those who are not able to afford to put in such systems, the individuals, the families and so on, the poor ones, will have difficulty doing that, and as a result, wouldn't be able to put one in. But the thing is, the less generation that MUL does means that the individual cost to the consumer would go up based on our system as it currently exists. So that if we reduce the consumption from MUL, it means that the cost to the individuals, in order for MUL to maintain its service, in order for it to be able to function, would have to raise its price. Now, that's a problem. Now, there are a number of ways to deal with that. Either there's a subsidy of some kind, which is virtually impossible because we don't have the money. The second is that it also means higher, well, possibly higher maintenance costs for MUL, in that in order for the feed-in tariff function to work properly, it means that the system has to be more rigidly monitored, and it also means they must have the skill set and the expertise to get it done. Not to say it can't be done. I think we have the people who could do it. The problem is that it drives up the maintenance cost, and that, as well as maintenance and the cost. So we've got to do something about the fossil fuel that we use. And I get back to the fact from my experience that if we had the geothermal, we would be able to eliminate the fuel surcharge, which will allow us basically to do away with the up and down cost of of fuel, of using fuel, and the fact that Mull generates less would not be a significant factor. We would then be able to peg our tariffs simply to maintenance and distribution and maintenance, which hopefully we would be able to manage without having the costs go up and down. The difficulty, again, with managing the system is our size. It makes it easy because we're small, but it makes it hard, respectively, in terms of cost. We don't have the consumers, the amount of consumers, to pay for the kind of technology that would be required to make it cheaper. But I still think it's the way to go. It wouldn't be as good as we would like it to be, but it's something we would definitely benefit from in the long run.
Thanks a lot, Mr. White, for your contribution. Mr. Kenai Ryan.
Yeah, as the former managing director already said, feed-in tariffs will be good, but I have a different scenario to what he was talking about, the cost of the fuel. If Mull produce less power, is less fossil fuel we use. So I think that would cut the cost of how much you spend on fossil fuel in the long run. And for maintenance, the less the generator run, is the longer it takes to have an overhaul. I remember generator takes maybe 24,000 hours before you overhaul. So if you produce less power, it will take a longer time to have the overhaul. So the cost would reduce significantly to me. That's my understanding.
All right, thanks a lot for your input. Just to add in terms of the maintenance standpoint from a generator, you will have to have a reduction such that you can switch off a generator. If you don't have a sufficient reduction for that, then your maintenance costs will kind of stay the same, even though your sale reduces. I think that's where the concern Mr. White was actually suggesting there. So you have to have a sufficient reduction to allow for an engine to be switched off. Because even if the engine is running at 50% as opposed to 70%, it still has to be maintained after the same number of hours. So your sale will be less, but your maintenance stays the same. Mr. Jeffers, what's your input?
I don't have much to say, but yeah, just hoping for the best and that a solution would be found, you know.
Okay. Thanks a lot for your contribution. Mr. Lewis?
So, feed-in tariffs. Am I for them? Yes, with an important caveat that the government does not subsidize them. Mr. White explains the economic reasons for doing that. But there are some technical, and I make no apology, I'm on the board of Mull, so I will speak of the technical and cost challenges that this will introduce to Mull. Most of us here would know that if you introduce renewable or intermittent energy sources onto a grid in excess of 10% of your load, that it creates regulatory in terms of frequency and voltage fluctuations. And that's why anytime you're going over 10%, you need to add a battery, because that investment in the batteries is what overcomes those fluctuations in voltage and frequency. So if we allow feed-in tariff, right now, MUL and Government of Montserrat is already committed to having renewable energy in excess of 10% of the peak load. In that investment, Government of Montserrat and Mull are putting in the capacity of battery to be able to deal with that. So who pays for the battery when you do the feed-in tariff, when an individual or business wants to do that? Because I can tell you the economics is different from putting in just solar PV to putting in solar and batteries from an individual point of view. So that's one thing in terms of who will do that. And different islands are trying different things. In St. Vincent, they are mandating that if you are going to put in solar now, you are going to have to put in batteries. So you just can't put in solar by itself. So you, the individual that wants to do this, have to pay the cost of doing that. In the Bahamas, they're trying a total different thing where the utility has taken responsibility for controlling those variations. So they're putting in large capacities of batteries. So when you make an application based on the size of your system, they tell you that for you to put in this, you have an upfront cost as part of getting your license of X amount to account for the battery. So the cost increases. There's another factor from the utility that must be taken into consideration. When the utility is working in an area, they are in control of the electricity demands within the transmission and distribution. So if they're going to work in Lookout, they will announce that they're in Lookout and we're going to shut off electricity from X time to Y time. And that's because that's for health and safety reasons for the T&D workers that are going to be on the line. When you do feed-in tariff, if you do not have the right inverters and you're pushing electricity back into the grid, MUL may think that the system is off because they shut it off. But electricity is actually flowing back into the grid because it's coming from someone's private source. And that will put the guys that are working on the line from MUL at risk. So it is a lot more complicated in terms of doing it. Like I said, my personal feeling is that if it's going to be done, then the people that wants to do it needs to pay the cost themselves for doing it.
All right, thanks a lot. I just want to address the last thing that you said in relation to feeding back to the grid. And the critical thing there is the regulation in terms of allowing the importation of certain types of inverters into the country. Typically what we're speaking here of grid-tied inverters. So a grid-tied inverter will only operate if it sees a voltage from a grid or from a battery source. What you're doing here is basically allowing preventing such an event where power can be fed back to the grid. So if there's an outage, basically the inverter goes down, there's no production back onto the grid. So it's a matter of, if we go in that direction, is to ensure that whatever inverter is actually imported into the island is actually a grid tied and meet a particular specification. Mr. Ryan, any contribution on your end?
Not too much to contribute. Obviously, a lot of people with a lot of expertise in this area have already weighed in.
Okay.
Just to say, that for the cost going up, is that because the distribution costs kind of remain the same, but your kind of number of people are paying for it goes down? So that's the main problem. I mean, I think the main thing is, what is our long-term kind of vision? What do we want? And if we want to move towards renewable energy, what's the best way to do that? And then, to figure out the details and, what costs we're willing to pay to get there. So I think, just a very general strategic kind of thought.
All right, thanks.
I just want to inject something here as well, is that the distribution costs don't really stay the same. Distribution costs for doing that goes up. And it's important. It's not just the generation costs involved, it's the distribution. You go down on generation costs, but you go up on distribution because you have a lot more maintenance to do. You have a lot more checks to do. You have a lot more physical input. And that in itself drives up the cost.
Okay. All right, so I think, as I say, in this question is a two-part question. I think all of us seem to agree that it can allow for the transition in terms of improving or increasing the penetration of renewable energy onto the network. I think where we have sort of a difference is in relation to its impact on the utility. I'll just say this here, and I think it's important for utilities within the region to recognize that the regular way of doing business as a utility, it's changing. You have to be dynamic now as a utility and find different revenue sources or with different streams of revenue in terms of your business strategy. The idea of just being a generating company that transmits and distributes is something of yesteryear. You have to now look at other possible ways of augmenting your revenue stream. Now, what I think we are grappling with here is the whole issue of the impact that allowing the feed-in tariff and how it will actually impact on the utility, but not just on the utility, but on the ratepayers who aren't able to afford such system. But I think when you look at this question, you have to look at it from as a country as a whole. Is it beneficial overall for the country? And does it make the advancement that we are trying to make quicker or easier? But if we are going to do it, then we still have to take into consideration the impact it has on the utility and on the ratepayers, and figure ways of how we can actually minimize that. Now, the question comes in terms of, one, how efficient the utility is, because again, that again will depend on what level of feeding can actually be implemented. If you have a fully efficient utility, then having a reduction in sales may have a significant impact. But if there is opportunity for tweaking and improving the efficiency internally of the utility to allow for a more efficient use of fuel or revenue, in any case, it may allow for having just maybe allow for a particular demand size. So we can say, okay, we can allow for a feed-in tariff up to 50 kilowatt or something of that nature. So you allow persons with disposable income to actually do so without really significantly affecting the lower income persons and the utility as a whole. So I think it's a discussion that has to be done looking at both the utility and the country's advancement.
We need to be specific regarding Montserrat. And I hear the argument all the time with my work throughout the Caribbean about different circumstances. Most Caribbean islands' utilities have an issue with their generation capacity or investing in generating capacity. We don't have that issue in Montserrat. So MUL do not have an issue in terms of our generating capacity. I tell people all the time, we have to look at the core problem that we are trying to solve. I certainly have no desire, and I can speak for most people in here, to go into the business of producing electricity. For the uses that I need electricity for, I want it when I want it, and I want it at a price that is competitive. So if MUL and the government continues what they're doing, which is to provide cost-effective, reliable electricity, no one will have any demands for getting into the electricity industry. And that's what we have to remember. What is the core problem? And Government of Montserrat and MUL, with the investments that they've done to date, and the commitment in policy that approved by Cabinet and the board of MUL, it will continue to work to reduce the cost of electricity in a way that they believe that benefits everyone. If the utility and government invests in renewable energy and reduces the cost of electricity, every ratepayer for MUL benefits from that, proportionately to your use. So for us as a small economy, it makes sense that the government and the utilities to continue to do it. It is the most fair way to do it.
All right.
I would like to sort of add something to what you're saying. I hope what I add doesn't end up being a negative. But the view that MUL can operate as a efficient company is one thing. But it must be looked at in the broad sense of the country as a whole. And if it means, for instance, that MUL provides the service that would enable, for instance, myself or any other individual to put in a system, perhaps that's where it should go. And not just simply, for instance, if one of you decide you would like to have the benefit of having a solar system then perhaps MUL should be looking into the business of helping you to get that. And in doing so, gets a revenue and assists you in getting what you want, right? And not just looking at it from a simple distribution point or whatever. Granted, that is important because the more efficient MUL is, the better it is for everybody. But at the same time, we must not think of it as an entity in isolation because it must also cater for not only itself, but for, because MUL is providing a social service. It's providing not just a provider of electricity. It can do more. And that is what it must look into, and not just the bottom line, not just the strictly business sense.
And that is what I was sort of alluding to, in that you have to look at different revenue streams. And that's one way of doing it, where the utility itself becomes a provider and allow it to actually still provide what is required for the customers. Because you're going to have customers within the market segment that will want to be able to actually provide their own energy. And as such, you will have to see how best you can actually cater to those customers. And again, thanks again, guys, for making a meaningful contribution to this particular question. So as we move on to the next question, we are looking at now, how can the private sector, what role does the private sector have in enabling this transition that we're looking at, in moving away from fossil fuel? How can we, how can the private sector contribute to this transition? And I'll start again with Mr. Ryan on the other end, and then we'll go the other way.
Okay, I'll start again with the kind of low-hanging fruit. So, I mean, in terms of the private sector, obviously that, it needs to be commercially viable for them. And, I mean, I know we've heard a lot of the issues with kind of having kind of lots of independent energy producers, but if we set that to aside for one moment, so if the national policy is to kind of increase the amount of renewable energy that's produced, say, the easiest one for individuals being photovoltaics, the government would probably need to make it commercially attractive for people, for the businesses to implement those kinds of things. So kind of reducing duties and taxes for importing photovoltaics and installing them and utilizing them. So I think it would be kind of government policy to make it more economically attractive for the private sector to take up these technologies. So that's one point.
All right, thanks a lot, Mr. Ryan. Ms. Lewis?
Regarding the private sector and their involvement in energy. So, the point of view that I would approach it from is there are a number of jobs that MUL currently does not have the capability in-house and will go to the private sector. So take, for instance, we've got our first solar PV project, and we're doing another. As we speak today, to the best of my knowledge, we've got one person on island that is NABSEC certified, that is to design and install and maintain solar PV, and that person works for MUL. I know of one other person in the private sector that is currently in the process of getting certified. So we need people in the private sector to be able to do that, so that when opportunities come, they are properly certified to be able to carry out the work. and that's the main way that I believe that the private sector can contribute. Another way that the private sector can contribute, that if we're doing a project today, the EPC contractors that are doing the installation now have to go out to the wider market globally in terms of sourcing panels, racking, inverters, and the likes in order to make the system. Some of our retailers can now go and develop relationships with suppliers to become distributors of materials like that. So these are things that our private sector can do in order to contribute to the sector.
All right, thanks a lot, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Jeffers?
Thank you. The thing is with all of this, with the private sector and so on, is that, I mean, everybody knows that not enough is being done in the private sector, and we always talk about the government. We're trying to rely on the government for a lot of the things that we're doing, but we don't realize that we really are the government. Every single person here is the government. The people the 9 elected representatives are elected representatives. They're only here to be the spokespersons for us, to represent our interests, and to go to other countries and tell them what we as Monshashans want. And what we need to go and do is really to go and take things in our own hands, you know. There's a lot of things that we could do privately to go and help increase the energy sector and so on. And there's things that I'm working on personally as well that I'll be able to hopefully make an impact within the next few years. But I think that we need to go and just really do more. Like there's the project management office, the PMO, which has recently started, that can help people with getting things like grants and other means of fundings, and that we can really use to go and take advantage inside Montserrat, because there's a lot, and I mean millions and millions and millions of dollars out there that is easily accessible by Monshashans because of our unique position, because of our size, and because of the kind of projects that we want to do. These people literally just want to give us money, but we're just not taking it. We're just not doing it right now. So I think that once we really collaborate and once we really get our ideas together, if you can go to the PMO and talk to them about your ideas and really try to see if you can get some funding, because we have to go and take this in our own hands, because government is tied. Government's hands are tied with everything. So we have to, if we want to do something, we have to do it ourselves.
All right, thanks a lot, Mr. Jeffers. Mr. Ryan, your contribution to the question?
Well, from what Mr. Lewis is saying, the private sector will be good in, like, people have been importing electric vehicles, solar panels, or maybe wind turbines to help up with the energy sector in Montserrat. I have not much to say on that.
All right, thanks a lot, Mr. Ryan. Mr. White?
Well, one of the things I always think is that we, I guess, in this forum are concentrating in a way on energy efficiency, reducing fossil fuels, etc., etc. All of that is fine, but the private sector can play a big role by finding ways and means to utilize the energy. The more we consume, reduces the cost per unit of producing it. Now, it sounds counterproductive in a way by saying, on the one hand, let us reduce our energy consumption and the way we consume electricity. But if the private sector went into the business, finding businesses that consume energy in a larger extent, because our population is small, we don't have the large demand. And if we had a larger demand, we're certainly in a position, as Mr. Lewis said, we don't have a problem with providing capacity. What we have is providing consumption. If our consumption went up, our cost per units go down. Whether it's renewable energy or fossil fuels, well, we want to get rid of the fossil fuels anyway. But we can produce more renewable energy, and if we can, and if the private sector can now find businesses, put together whatever it requires to, maybe a business that exports or whatever, with the additional energy that we can provide, then it will help in the overall system and efficiency.
Thanks a lot again for your contribution. So I just want to make
Just one comment. I hope that none of us in here have a wish that the energy demand for Montserrat should do anything but go up. Montserrat economy, at the size that it currently is not sustainable. So if we all have a goal, which we all should, in my opinion, of being able to contribute more to the country rather than depending as much as we do on the UK government and other donors, then the main way that that is going to happen is through economic growth. With economic growth comes more demand for electricity. What has to change is the amount of energy per GDP. Is that ratio that needs to change? And as Mr. White says, the cost of electricity for that ratio also needs to go down. So the demand for electricity, none of us, in my opinion, should be hoping that it goes anything but up, which means that our economy is growing.
All right, so I want to just add, I think, 3 points that was shared. The first, I agree in terms of when you look at the contribution from the private sector, you can actually see it from the standpoint of having an increase in the use of energy, but an increase in an efficient use of energy. I think that is critical in our side. Even if the increase in the overall energy use is to happen, we need to have an increase in efficient use of energy. I think that is critical. And I think the private sector has to see itself and see opportunities where they can actually grow the sector, because I think that, again, is important for the island. On the other hand as well, too, the private sector has to see that there are other opportunities besides electricity generation in which you can actually have growth. You can actually have it in the transportation sector. As I said, that's another area that significant opportunities that may exist that is not being captured by the private sector. Now, this is not an original idea, but this is something that someone would have discussed with me before. With the whole idea of having the fiber optic project implemented, you have opportunities here for additional opportunities in terms of whether it's data centers, which are high energy consumers, to be implemented. And this is probably a role for the private sector to actually jump on board with and take the opportunity to invest in such projects so that it could actually increase the consumption on the island itself. All right, so thanks a lot for your contribution in that regards. So we're on to the next question, which we're looking at a particular topic that is of interest, I think, to most Montserratian. So back in, I think in 2006, the original conversation in terms of the geothermal project would have started on the island, and preparation for Jillian would have started in 2012. And then we've dug 2 wells successfully, which can produce between 1.5 to 2 megawatt of energy. So in total, if we were to have a reinjection well, we can produce up to about 4 megawatts of energy from geothermal. Now, the question I want to ask the panelists is, with limited access to grant funding to implement a surface plant, the government of Montserrat may have to seek creative alternative financial mechanisms, such as PPP or debt financing, etc., to facilitate the implementation of such a plant. In your view, how critical is the implementation of this project to the transition of the island's energy sector and economy? And in the absence of grant funding, what financial mechanism would you recommend for the implementation of a geothermal surface plant? So it's a twofold question. The first part is in terms of how critical you think this project is to the island and the energy sector and the economy. And the second component of it is in terms of in the absence of grant funding, what financial mechanism you think is PPP or debt financing? What do you think is the best way forward as it relates to this particular project? And I'll start from Mr. White on this time.
In my view, the development of the third well and the possibility of having at least 4 megawatts capacity is very critical to the sustainable development of Montserrat. The reason I say that is that because of our small size, we need from the beginning to get some form of influx of some investment. And investment here can be attracted by having the excess energy available for businesses to utilize. Now, if we have that in place, it's easier to convince an investor, come and work here because we have the energy to supply your needs. That's one thing. The other thing is almost anything you think of these days rely on energy. And we struggle in Montserrat to develop businesses that don't rely on energy. And I mentioned earlier the need for consumers, the private sector, to increase their consumption. I did not mention at that point why I think it's necessary for them to do that. Because it's obvious that most of the businesses that we are looking at these days require some use of energy. But if your business is relying on energy and the cost of energy is high, you're going to think twice about even trying to set up that business. So we want the cost of energy to be down, we want the availability of energy to be in excess, and we want the ability then to be able to say to an investor, here, come here, we can supply your needs. Now, that makes it critical in my sense, because we want to develop an economy in the absence of a large consumer base. Obviously, if we had a large consumer base, we would probably need more energy and want more energy, but that's an aside. We're talking about what is existing now. With respect to how we would fund it, that is difficult, because if part of our strategy is to bring in a private-public partnership, which is probably the most acceptable to the majority of people, at least those who look at the economics, it presents a difficulty. A private person coming into Montserrat to help develop our energy sector is looking for a reasonable return on their investment. And in today's financial environment, they want a big return. They're not going to put their money in simply for charity. And even though we may have some people who are magnanimous enough to say, well, okay, I'll settle for a low return on my money, it means that return must be paid for. We must find the money to pay for that return. And that impacts the cost of electricity, not only to our local consumer, but to any future investor. I would prefer to see our utility costs as low as possible to encourage businesses, and our return would not necessarily in what we get from selling our energy, but what it does for the rest of the economy and building the rest of the economy. And I would like to see that. If in that case, then obviously I would prefer to see grant funding, at least in the initial stage, where we produce the 4 megawatts. Once we start building on that, then we can talk about further investment, which would allow us, and of course, because we have built a base with the low-cost energy, we would then be able to afford to pay for or help private or be able to attract private investment for further expansion. But our initial development, I believe, need to be grant funded so that we can build the consumer base, the youth, so that we can then be able to say to a private investor, come, we'll be able to give you so much return on your investment. Of course, if there's a private investor who doesn't have a problem with waiting, I don't know, for whatever time for a return, I have no problem with that.
All right, thanks a lot, Mr. White, for your contribution. Mr. Ryan?
Yeah, for me, I think the geothermal plant should be built maybe 2 years ago, but as I said, there is no funding now. But for me, coming back from training in Iceland and see all the geothermal plants in Iceland, you make you wonder why are we here still? Why we don't have a plant as yet? But for funding, for my training, they say to get funding, you maybe could go to different institutions like the World Bank and see if you could get grants, not a loan, so to help you implement the different parts of the plant. So you maybe could have maybe 4 to 5 different institutions giving you grants to help you with the plant, instead of trying to go to one institution and try to get all the funds from that institution. So for me, I think we should try and see if we could get grants from different institutions to help us further along to get our plant built. And for the economy, the spillout from the geothermal plants. You have the brine, you could have spas, well, not much greenhouses, because we have the temperature is here is very high, but spas, mineral extraction, and all those other things you could get from the geothermal plant could help our economy and help with the reducing costs for electricity in Montreal.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Ryan. You're talking about additional factors to help the business case for the project itself. Mr. Jeffers?
Yeah, I agree with what was said already. We really need to go and get the geothermal plant up and running, and having augmented services as well that Mole and whoever else can really add on to make it more profitable, because in the end, Mole and everybody else is still a business. They're still bringing in profit, I assume. I'm not assuming that they're just breaking even every month. So then they can use some of the money that they've been making to actually invest into things that will make them more money and be able to really go further. So I really hope that the geothermal project gets somewhere, and yeah, that we'll be able to have better energy.
All right, thanks a lot, Mr. Jeffers. Mr. Lewis?
So is the geothermal project critical? Yes, but so is solar and so is wind along with battery. So they're all important from that point of view. The capital costs for a geothermal plant versus doing a solar array with battery, doing a wind farm with battery, or doing a combination of solar and wind with battery. The geothermal cost is the highest of all of them, which means that the unit cost per kilowatt hour of energy produced is going to be the highest. So my point of view is that in Montserrat, we have a geothermal option, we have a solar option, and we have wind option or combination of solar and wind option. And we need to look at the economics and decide which one is best for us going forward. For me, my position is that the money spent to date in terms of the exploration and drilling of the wells on Montserrat is sunken money, because those monies do not have any factor in what the geothermal plant development cost is going to be. It's no different to us going and doing solar. It's no different to us to going and doing wind in terms of doing that. If we are going to do geothermal project without grant funding, then we need to look at all the different options that we have and choose the most economic of them, so that the ratepayers of Montserrat pays the least amount that they can for electricity going forward.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Ryan?
Okay, so I agree this is a purely economic question, and it needs a full economic analysis to see, what the best options are. And so I'm sure somebody can do that and present those numbers, and the case would be a lot clearer. I know that in a lot of countries, like geothermal, the costs in terms of generation costs, it's like hydro is cheapest, then geothermal, and then other things down the line. So I think geothermal energy does have, in the aggregate, kind of low generation costs. It has high upfront costs, and then the generation costs are quite low. So I think the numbers need to be crunched to make that case a lot clearer. In terms of the question, again, it's a matter of crunching the numbers. Obviously, the most attractive is to get somebody else to pay for it with grant funding. The question says specifically not that. But everybody is ignoring that, and I'm going to as well. I think Montserrat has, it's kind of like an easy win in terms of, these places we've already done. Like, the hard part is the exploration and the drilling, and you've tested the capacity. There's like a known quantum of resource there, so the easy part is just putting the plant on top of it. It costs money, but that's that. So I think a very attractive project could be put together. I mean, the hard stuff is done, so there's kind of low risk. It's a very low risk project. You know what the costs are going to be. So I think grant funding should be available from different sources. Maybe if it doesn't cover everything, again you have to see what public or private interest is there out there, and what kind of terms are they offering, and then what kind of if we have to go and pay for it ourselves, what kind of loans are available, and what are the rates, and then you see which one makes more sense. Again, as other Ryan was saying, you can have also, there's a lot of auxiliary things that we can explore in terms of looking at geothermal energy production. You have direct use, which Kennard was saying, you can have spas, which could be part of our tourism product, as well as being nice for us to have ourselves. And you can also do counterintuitive things with that direct energy. You can use it for cooling. So you can make large freezers, chillers. You can also dry agricultural products. Lots of different things that you can do with this energy. So it's for us to kind of look and see what kind of niches would fit into Montserrat, where what parts of the private sector would have interest in those kind of areas, and then kind of explore adding value to that. So Montserrat's small, so you could have something like a large geothermal chiller where people could store agricultural produce for very low cost. Same with the freezing. These are all kind of engineering and economic calculations that have to be made. So I think.
All right. So thanks a lot for your contribution, Mr. Ryan. So I think what you're speaking about there in terms of the chilling component of it is that you can use an absorption chiller using the heat from the geothermal to actually provide cooling. Now, in terms of my take on this particular topic, it's twofold. One, as everybody has actually rightly said, the economic case has to be made in relation to the project itself. We have to crunch numbers and ensure that it means economical sense for the island. The other factor I'll put into this as well too is also from the technical standpoint, when you're looking at from a standpoint of reliability and its impact in relation to integration with the grid. Of the different resources that we have mentioned, geothermal is probably the most stable of all three. And it adds another dimension in terms of the consideration that has to go into the overall selection. But I think what needs to be done is to look at your selection from this point onwards. As Owen would have mentioned, to some extent, the monies that would have been invested is sunken costs. But also, you will still have to see, take into consideration the additional benefits that can be had from the geothermal plant and input that into your business case to make an overall decision on the best way forward. Now, Mr. Ryan on my right would have mentioned the idea of having spas and that's additional stuff to the geothermal project. And the next question that leads us into, and it's going to be our final panel question for now, and then we'll go into the audience to ask some questions. It's basically how can the energy sector assist with the development of agriculture and tourism, because these are two important sectors in the economy, and the growth of these can have important consequences for the economy itself. So how can the energy sector assist with the development of the agriculture and tourism sector on the island? This time I'll start with you, Mr. Graham Ryan, on the left-hand side.
Well, I already gave my answer, I think. Yeah, so as was mentioned before, you can use these direct use energy, and it's a lot more energy efficient to use the heat directly rather than to use the heat, turn it into electricity, and then use it to for heat again. That's not a good way to use the energy. So a number of ways that you can use the heat directly, and you get like a tenfold or more kind of energy efficiency by doing that. So it's obvious things like drying agricultural produce on a kind of large scale, and as I mentioned already, the absorption chillers, you could have a kind of large freezing unit, large chilling unit that you could use for central storage at low cost of agricultural produce. So those are two things that would help with the agricultural sector, and then we've already mentioned on the tourism sector with spas. So in New Zealand and in Iceland, you have that the Blue Lagoon, which is right next to the geothermal power plant, uses that fluid. It was a big tourist attraction in New Zealand. In Rotorua, which is a big geothermal area, they have, there's lots and lots of spas around. There's a big one called the Polynesian Spa, which is, very upscale, and people really enjoy it. It's a really fantastic place, and so this can really kind of add to our product. And in terms of geothermal energy, it also kind of, I think it also kind of adds to the brand of Montserrat as well. We're kind of using the kind of, although it's not directly from the volcano, but we're using that kind of volcanic energy to kind of power ourselves. So it's kind of, I think it's part of some powerful branding as well for the island to use our geothermal energy to kind of power our lives. So I think I'll leave it there.
All right, thanks for that, Mr. Ryan. Mr. Lewis?
So the energy sector is an enabling sector, and what I mean by that it affects all other sectors, as started out this morning by the Honorable Minister in terms of acknowledging globally first and then locally what energy is used for. All of us know that regardless of what sector it is, we need energy to do the things that we are doing. Specifically in terms of agriculture, a number of our farms are located in areas where the current MUL grid does not extend into. The cost of actually extending the grid into those areas are prohibitive. So smaller solar and wind along with battery microgrids at farms would be able to provide electricity at a reasonable cost to to the agricultural industry, enabling farmers to utilize pumping for like irrigation, and therefore increase yields in the future. In terms of tourism, I would like to address that from one of our main challenges that we have in Montserrat in terms of access. About a month ago, Denmark started using for the first time a 100% electric ferry for trips that were about 2 hours long. I know that our trip from Antigua to Montserrat, which is our predominant route for our ferry, is about 90 minutes, which means that the future may be bright in terms of us looking at an electric ferry rather than a fossil fuel ferry, or one that is capable of having both technologies. And lastly, from an access point of view, I am of the opinion that a 19-seater plane is more efficient in terms of fuel than a 7-seater plane in terms of total number of passengers that the plane can carry in a given year. So I would like to see us look at also the possibility of sourcing through the contracts that we have in terms of air transport, some 19-seater planes.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Jeffers?
Thank you. All green products and so on are really becoming a lot bigger, and there's a much higher demand for green conscious products, adventure tourism, etc. It's becoming greater and greater, and if we could really advertise Montserrat not only just as a really good place to hike, to go on snorkel and do all those kind of adventurous things, as well as we're also green conscious, that would capture a market that's really growing right now. So it's not the biggest yet, but I know that in the future, and as the world is changing, as it's becoming more cheaper to travel and so on, that people will want something different. It's not the same old, oh yeah, we're just going to the Caribbean to relax and get a tan and then go back to tell all our friends. They want to experience something, And with renewable energy, I hope that we'll also be able to just develop that more, so that our tourism products will be able to be renewable, that we can use electric buses instead. Also, another thing is that because Montserrat is so small, and because of our size, smaller monies make a greater impact in Montserrat. So that means that something that would take maybe 100 million to implement on a island-wide scale, it would only cost maybe like a fraction of that. So if we could use Montserrat and pitch Montserrat as a testing ground for bigger companies, for other people to invest in us, to show that we can be a model city for certain things, like becoming 100% renewable, this and that, then we'll be able to get a lot of funding while still be able to, to really show other people how we can move forward and how we can be a better country.
All right, thank you a lot, Mr. Jeffers. Mr. Ryan?
Well, I agreed with Mr. Graham Ryan for all of what he's saying about the agriculture sector, where we use the geothermal plant for drying, and maybe fish farming too. So I think, for me, I think we need to get the geothermal plant going. And the quicker we get it, the better for our island. And for the, yeah, that's it.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Ryan. Mr. White?
Well, I'm glad Mr. Lewis brought up the issue with transportation. I've been talking about that for a long time. I mentioned earlier the benefits of having excess energy capacity that would come forward with the geothermal. And what I'm thinking here is, and what I've been talking about, and I mentioned earlier, the production of hydrogen and syngas. And the reason I mention that with respect to transportation, again, is the fact that hydrogen fuel cell technology is at the stage where shouldn't be even talking about diesel for our proposed, we've been talking about proposed purpose-built ferry for the longest time. It means that we could produce the fuel for that ferry locally. We wouldn't have to depend on outsourcing. We'd eliminate the diesel cost, which is the highest factor in the cost of transportation to and from by sea. And the possibility as well of producing a fuel for aircraft from utilizing our energy source. Now, the thing is that the production cost, because of our low consumption, might be a little higher than it would be if we had to go and purchase. But at the same time, the fact that we produce it locally and it is a part of our own resource means that if you want to call it a subsidy, we can easily subsidize the fuel costs for the ferry or any other access. Now, it's very important, I think, that we look at our energy resources and our production in terms of the facilitating aspect and not so much as of the production aspect. We have to be able to grow our private sector, we have to be able to grow our economy, and in order to do that, we need a facilitator. And I think the biggest facilitator that we can possibly do with relatively low further inputs is the production of energy, whether it be geothermal, whether it be wind, whether it be otherwise. And I'll talk in the last question has to deal with something perhaps I shouldn't even start at this point, but I will address with respect to wind energy and solar energy further. But I'll stop there.
All right, thanks a lot, Mr. White. Yes, there were two further questions in relation to the panel, but I think because of time, I've actually crossed out those two other questions. So one question was in relation to wind, and the other question was in relation to energy standard. At this moment, what I want to do is to give the audience an opportunity to ask any questions of the panelists. And then after that, I'll just give each panelist an opportunity to make a final comment. So if anybody in the audience have any question that they would like to pose to the panels, and we'll go from there.
Hello, good day. I have a couple of questions. I don't know if to pose all of them one time or just go one at a time.
Give us two at a time.
Okay, first one. How does the CARICOM energy policy, which sponsors this event, ties into the local energy policy? And does it, is it feasible? And the next question, Mr. White has been referring to our numbers. How do we get the economy up to scale so that the production can the demand can use the production? I'll leave that for now. I have more questions, but I'll leave that for now.
So I'll respond first to the first question. As it relates to the CARICOM energy policy, it's a region-wide policy. And then you have the local policy. In terms of the development of the local policy, there was also assistance from CARICOM to do so. So they are basically linked in terms of, strategically in terms of a regional direction it's going. So the policy, both policies would have incorporated similar themes in a sense.
Well, what I'm saying is that CARICOM, on their page, they talk about feeding. Now, from the panelists, the panel don't really see the need for feeding on our economy level.
Oh, feeding tariffs, is that
feeding tariffs,
okay.
Because CARICOM does put that as one of their main policy that they want to introduce as part of their energy.
Right, so in terms of CARICOM policy, I mean, it's not mandatory for the islands. I mean, they can choose different aspects of what they want to incorporate. So I think after, if you look at the policy itself, then each individual island can choose to implement different aspect of that into their own particular strategy. So it's not a compulsory component.
Yes, but what you're saying previously is that Montserrat adapt pretty much the same thing as what CARICOM has put out, which, from what the panel is saying, is not feasible for Montserrat.
So, in terms of the CARICOM energy policy, if you look at the Montserrat energy policy, our policy is actually structured the same as the CARICOM energy policy, and that was deliberate. CARICOM, and remember, CARICOM is made up of the 15 member states. And so CARICOM has some targets that the 15 member states energy ministers would have gotten together, discussed, debated, and decided upon. Then there are individual agreements between each of the 15 member states and CARICOM in terms of what your part should be. So let's take electricity generation as a specific example. So CARICOM wants to increase the amount of renewable energy electricity generation throughout the 15 member states. There's a target for them to do. So for them, the agreement is that Montserrat will produce 100% of our electricity from renewable energy. That is also in the Montserrat energy policy. So they correspond, they link in terms of doing that. But there are going to be circumstances where CARICOM have a target, but that target is not in the best interest of an individual nation state. So in the individual nation state policy, a responsible government are going to set targets that they know are realistic for them. So there are some things that are going to be aligned for all the countries, and there are things that for individual countries just not going to be aligned with the CARICOM one, because CARICOM is a combination of 15 nation states.
Okay, well, that's good to know, and therefore I'd like to see some realigning of our local policy to address our shortness of the economy. Our scale of our economy is not able for us to promote too much renewable into the system, because our local providers will suffer, and the smaller consumers, the smaller people, would have to pay more if more people have renewable fuel or renewable energy at their homes. Let me just add another quick scenario. A young professional couple in Montserrat, they want to build a house for, say, 750,000 EC dollars. They'll probably be paying, say, 3,000 EC dollars a month for 25 years to cover that cost. And that's a conventional house with conventional electric use and, just the regular conventional things. However, if they want to build an energy efficient house, a smart home, which will cost probably twice as much, 1.5 million EC dollars, paying, say, 6,000 EC dollars a month. How does the policy address attracting that kind of investment in home ownership, in renewable energy? You're talking unconventional, you're talking sensors in every room to say when people are coming in and out, fridges and smart stuff. How does the local policy encourage that kind of investment, especially for young people? 25, you tie them in for 25 years into this policy. How can we do that?
Look, it doesn't matter who it is or what you're doing. Every investment that anyone is considering to make, you need to sit down and look at, okay, what's the capital cost? What is the rate at which I can borrow? How long will I be able to borrow from? Can I afford the particular rates over that period of time? The fact of the matter is that we all have to be realistic in terms of what we do. So one of the good things that is happening naturally in the appliance industry is that appliances are becoming more efficient with every generation. So each new generation, let's say refrigerator. So if you bought a refrigerator last year and you go and buy a new refrigerator this year, it is slightly more efficient. So you will be using less electricity. It will also cost you more to buy the one that's 2019 than the 2018 one. So your capital outlay is going to be more if you're going to do that. You have to sit down and say, is it worth me? When am I going to get my payback period? Is this going to take me 2 years, 3 years, 5 years for me to get my money back and then start saving? So it's an individual decision. Governments in themselves have to look at what can we do to facilitate, as Mr. White mentioned. So is it worth, like government of Montserrat for a year made appliances not duty-free because we had to pay the service charge, but the consumption tax was waived. So a number of people were able to go out and replace fridges and microwaves and the likes. And in doing that, their electricity bill went down because most of us had appliances that were 5 years plus that we were replacing now in terms of doing that. So here it is that the government actually had an incentive program by making these things duty-free for a period of time, knowing that, one, your costs will go down because you're paying less duty for it, but also your running costs for that appliance is going to go down because you're going to have a more efficient one also.
Thanks for that answer. I know you said about the one-off, but I think something like energy policy should make it continuous if people are making large investments as a mortgage. And I think there should be some policy driven towards this kind of incentivizing energy use or proper energy use if we want this policy or these kind of
Incentives. So
things to happen. Yeah.
I'm just going to respond to your question. So currently there is some discussions going on in relation to having tax incentive for energy efficient appliances. So I think that will answer to your question in regards to that. The institution of tax incentive for persons who want to purchase energy efficient appliances. All right, so another question from the audience, and then we will give the panelists an opportunity to make their final statement.
Yes, good day. My question is basically focused on standards in terms of all the new renewables that are coming in and the appliances and the efficiency of the appliances and the infrastructure. Would we have a standard setup or a watchdog organization that will recommend goods and services that we should be looking at rather than just going on the internet and picking something arbitrarily?
All right, so again, in terms of the concession that we were talking about for energy efficient product, one of the things that we were looking at several different standards to allow for those concessions. Regionally, the standard body, CrossQ, is the one that is in charge of developing standards for the region. Thus far, they have developed standards for refrigerators, lighting. They are now about to develop standards for solar panels and so forth. So these standards will actually guide us in terms of what product can be, what product should be classified as energy efficient or what standard we should actually apply. Additionally, you have the Energy Star label as another one, and then we also have the EU label as another means of recommending to consumers to purchase these particular items. I think, Owen, you want to make a contribution?
So as Kenrick mentioned, through the work of COSQ and CARICOM, the standards are being developed. However, what needs to happen, which is what I think Stephen is asking, is what framework are we putting in place? And particularly that's between trade and customs in terms of ensuring that that we are doing some kind of monitoring to make sure that the products that find their way into Montserrat actually meet the standards that we have signed up through COSQ and CARICOM. So we need to look at what is that framework between trade and customs to make sure. Secondly, we need to get our local merchants and the population on wide aware of the standards, so that if I'm going to go online and order something, I need to know that if it does not meet this minimum standard, when it gets to customs, they will not allow me to bring it home. I'll be paying a higher rate for doing so. And the merchants will know that, look, the products that we're going to order must meet these minimum standards in terms of doing that. So we've got some work to work out between trade and customs, how we are going to monitor the whole system in terms of ensuring the system, and then we need to continue what we're doing today and the other works that the unit plans to do in terms of making the public aware of these and other related issues.
All right, thanks a lot, Mr. Lewis. At this point, we're going to just, we have a few questions that we want to ask the audience, and we have prizes for responding to those questions. After we've had those questions, we will just give each of the panelists an opportunity to say their final word, and then we'll basically close from there. Good. All right, so one of the questions will be, if you can name 5 ways you can 5 methods you can use to save energy in your home. There's 5 different ways you can actually save energy in your home. So anyone? 5 different ways. Huh? All right, so Lonnie, want to make an attempt at it? You're getting close. You're being assisted. That's correct. Thank you very much.
The next question is, when was the launch here in Montserrat for the energy, for CARICOM Energy? The month and the year. Pardon? That's correct.
So we have stated that annually, CARICOM Energy Month is actually held on an annual theme. So what is this year's theme for CARICOM Energy Month? Mr. Prasad would have mentioned it in his prayer. And sorry. Thank you very much. Mr. Prasad, did you assist in that regards? And then we have one more gift, compliments of ICT. Sorry. And this question, I think, needs to be a 2-part question. Let me see. Oh. All right, so and I think I'll exclude persons from. All right, okay, let's just do it. Okay. Um, it's a simple question. In what year was the first geothermal well dug? Simple question. So there goes our winner. Thank you very much. Mr. Prasad, you were excluded, sorry. All right, so what we're going to do is just going to give each panelist an opportunity to make their final comments in relation to today's discussion. I'd like to be brief because we have kind of gone way over time. So I'll give you 2 minutes to just make a final contribution as we move forward.
No, just to add to the discussion on the economics of the geothermal power plant. I mean, there are different kinds of power plants that you can use, which have different levels of cost. You have, you know, the kind of Rolls-Royce where you have, you know, multiple units on it that have flash and binary and all these kinds of, you know, and those would be more expensive. But you can have, at the lower end, you have something called a back pressure turbine, which is quite simple and cheap, and the cost of that is that the energy is less efficient, but that might be one way of reducing the costs in the beginning to kind of get the ball rolling. Use a back pressure turbine and start generating some electricity, and maybe save some of that money to build up as you go forward into the future.
Thanks for that, Mr. Ryan. Mr. Lewis?
So Montserrat's energy future is all of our future, both individually and collectively. And I sincerely hope that we will continue to engage one another privately and publicly like we're doing today, so that Montserrat's energy future is one that all of us would be proud of.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Lewis.
Okay, I just want to thank the ministry again for inviting me to be on the panel. And I just really hope that, and I really want to empower people to really come forward with your ideas when it comes to anything, especially renewable technologies and so on. As I said, there's millions and millions of dollars out there willing to be given to you to be able to support your projects. There's a lot of people out there that are willing to help, but you just have to go and come forward and really try to go and move with your idea and to just empower Montreal.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Jeffers. Mr. Ryan?
Yeah, I would like to thank the Energy Unit for this invitation on the discussion panel. Graham was saying about the back pressure plant. I did a project in Iceland, and for the pressure that we have, the back pressure plant does not produce much. So a single flash or binary would be the best, well, recommended plant for Montserrat, and that's my 2 points.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Ryan. Mr. White?
Yes, I think this is a very important discussion, and I believe it should happen more often than just when Energy Week or Energy Month. It's something we need to do, not just in terms of energy, just about everything else with respect to the development of Montserrat. And the fact that energy is kind of essential in terms of anything we do and need for our future development, I think it's important that we have more discussions of this type. Things are changing in very rapidly in the energy field, and the more often we engage ourselves with what is happening, we will then be able to make decisions going forward which will benefit us in terms of our development. And I want to stress one thing, that energy is a facilitator in the sense that you need it for just about everything. But it can also, and in most places, that is all that it is done, is to have energy so that they can do other things. I think in our case, we are fortunate that we can be in a position where we not only have energy as a facilitator, not just energy because we need it for something else, but we could also get into the business of energy as a resource for sale, in many ways. I mentioned one or two before, I'll mention one again, and that's maybe the production of hydrogen, which is an energy carrier, which allows us to do things internally as well as being able to do it outside, production of oxygen, production of fertilizer, production of fuels, the whole series of things that can be done, and as using energy as a product for development in and of itself, apart from its facilitating role.
All right, thanks a lot, Mr. White, for your contribution. So I would like to thank the Honorable Dr. Sammy Joseph, who's the Minister in the Ministry of Communication, Works, Energy, and Labor. I would also like to thank Mrs. Menz, the PS in the Ministry of Agriculture. And I'd like to also thank each of the panelists, Mr. Graham Ryan, Mr. Owen Lewis, Mr. Ashneil Jeffers, Mr. Kennard Ryan, and Mr. Peter White for their valued contribution to today's program. I'll also thank you, the audience, for being receptive and staying attentive for the last 2.5 hours. And I'll also like to thank ZGB Radio and the GIU for providing coverage of this particular function. I've said this throughout this particular month, that for the transition to be made in Montserrat, it needs basically all hands on deck, meaning the persons in authority and the persons doing the execution of what is required. And the hope is that throughout this process, we will have the support of each and every one in making this achievement. As Mr. White says, that this discussion should not be a discussion that is just held during Energy Month. It should be an ongoing discussion. And that is something that I will like to facilitate, because I think it's important to have the discussion continued and having persons bringing forth ideas that can help to move the island into the right direction. And with that being said, it's something that I'm pretty sure that I'm going to try to set up another discussion in quick time. Again, I want to thank each and everyone for participating and being present. I'd like to thank my assistants, Aswin Kati and Anissa Lindsay, for their dedication and assistance in this regards. They would have made a big effort. And thanks again for everyone for turning out. Right? That's it, thank you. We should have some refreshment on the outside, so you can partake of it. Thank you.